Another week, another distribution of Linux. Last week, we looked at Bazite, which was based off Fedora. This week, we're cutting straight to the source. We'll look at how easy it is to get Fedora up and running, from downloading to installing to getting up and running with our very first game. And this is going to be for beginners as well, so we're keeping on the no terminal challenge. We've briefly talked about in previous videos how a non-insignificant number of Linux distributions are actually based off the two most popular foundations, being Debian and Arch. What doesn't seem to be common practice, at least from what I've seen since I've switched to Linux, is going straight to vanilla Debian or vanilla Arch and using them by themselves, unless you're the sort of person who wants to build their own distro and start from the foundation. However, I don't think a lot of beginners would want to do that. So this is where Fedora stands out. Fedora is not only a foundational distro, being something that other people often build off of, but it is known as something that can be used out of the box. So let's test those claims today. Those of you who just want to see how easy this is without participating, kick back, relax, we're getting into the meat and potatoes soon. But for those of you who want to follow this as a tutorial, you'll need a Ventoy USB. If you're not sure what that is, here is the very quick version. Get a USB that's 8 GB or more. Back up all the data on that USB. Download Ballanet Etcher for either Windows, Mac, or Linux. Download Ventoy. Now open Ballanet Etcher, and in the first section, select Ventoy. In the second section, select your USB drive. This is your last chance to back up any of the data on that USB, because once you hit flash, it will be wiped and you will have a Ventoy USB. Now, if that was way too fast for you, I understand that that might have been too fast for some beginners, I have a much more detailed version in this video here, try before you buy. But from here on, I'm going to assume that you either have a Ventoy USB or you just want to see what the fuss is all about. So let's crack on into Fedora. When you get to your search engine inside of your browser, you might need to search Fedora Linux just to narrow down the search results. Once you've selected the right link, making sure that it's not a scam, you'll notice that there are no cookie notices on this website, which is excellent and proof that not every website needs to have cookies notices. The download button is a little bit buried, but it's only a few clicks away. So to start with, hover over the top where it says Get Fedora. Here we can see a lot of options, but let's focus on just the first two for now. If we pick the first option, Fedora Workstation, we'll get GNOME as a desktop. GNOME is more of a Mac OS feeling experience for a desktop environment. But we've looked at GNOME in our two previous videos. I say looked at, but we didn't really look at it properly in the Ubuntu video. But because I've technically done GNOME in the last two videos, I'm going to pick KDE this time, just to balance things out. KDE Plasma has more of a Windows feel to it. Once we've clicked on that, the next section asks us what platform we're installing to, and most DIY PCs or laptops will be x86-64. Once you click on that, it should go over to your downloads folder, or wherever you've set your browser to put your downloads. Mine's going straight to the desktop. Once it's finished downloading, plug in your Ventoy USB and either copy paste or drag and drop Fedora onto the Ventoy USB. Once it's done transferring, safely eject. Now for another backup your data warning. If this is the computer that you want to install Fedora on, or if the computer you want to install Fedora on has anything else on it already, make sure you back up all the data, because the way I'm going to advise you to install this is a fresh install, meaning that I'm not teaching how to either partition a drive, split it in two, or install to a second SSD. I'm showing you a clean slate. And even if you were going to partition your drive or install to a second SSD, you need to back up your data if you have another operating system on that computer already. Because even if you are adamant on sticking with Windows, holding on to Windows for dear life, and doing a dual boot or a partition or anything else, well, the newest update of Windows 11 is destroying SSDs. So even if you have no interest in installing anything Linux related, better back up your data. I don't even have to roast Windows for that, it roasts itself. So, with your data backed up, shut down the computer you want to install Fedora on. Now find either the F2 or delete keys on your keyboard. press the on button of your computer and rapidly press either F2 or delete until you get into the BIOS. Which key it is depends on your motherboard manufacturer, being Gigabyte, Asus, ASRock, or MSI. If your computer goes straight back to Windows or whatever was previously installed, shut down the computer and try that step again, perhaps trying the alternative key. Once you get into your BIOS, you're looking for an option similar to a boot override. Here on my Gigabyte motherboard, it's under the save and exit menu and it is called boot override. But on my Asus motherboard, it's just called a boot menu. Now don't be confused if you see the word Fedora in my BIOS here. That's not my USB. That's because I had Bazite installed on this computer previously, and as I mentioned, Bazite is built off of Fedora, so that's the way that Bazite has labeled my hard drive for my BIOS to see. What you're looking for is your USB, which, the same as Bazite being Fedora in the BIOS, our USB isn't going to be named whatever we named it in the operating system. So take an extra minute to pick the right option here. But once you've figured out which one is your USB, the size is normally a dead giveaway, press enter while hovering over that option. Now we'll get into Ventoy, and inside of Ventoy, hover over Fedora with the arrow keys and press enter. Normal mode is absolutely fine, so press enter again. And now a potential difference between what you're seeing on screen and what you might go through in your own process. For those of you who've seen the Bazite video, you might remember this screen. This was the last time I had to press enter during the Bazite video to finish the installation. But here I'm seeing it before I even get into Fedora for the first time. And I suspect that this is just a crossing of paths between another version of Fedora and this version of Fedora. However, I have no idea if you're going to see this screen or not. So if you do see it, all you have to do is press down once and press enter on continue boot. And then decide if you would like to test your media or not. If you want to test it, just press enter. And if not, you can just press up and press enter to get straight into Fedora. Now, after a little bit of patience, we'll get into the try before you buy or the live USB portion of Fedora, which Bazite didn't have this, but Bazite is also working on this option as a beta. So what that means is that you can technically mess around with the operating system here before it's installed to see if you like the feel of it, as I mentioned in the try before you buy video, thus the title. Except that you don't have to buy anything because so far every Linux distribution is free. And not free as in steal your data pretending it's free, no, just free, normal free. Freedom free. So far I haven't encountered a Linux distribution which tries to make you the product. But back to Fedora. That button right in the middle of the screen, which your mouse is likely hovering over, that's the install button. We can click that, but we will need to wait a few moments. Clicking the next button doesn't do anything because that's just a welcome screen. We're actually waiting for the install app to boot, which will depend on which hardware you're installing this on. You'll know it because it will go into a full screen application. And those who've seen the Bazite video will recognize this installer because it looks almost identical. Language is easy and straightforward, and now we get a main menu of an installer. We'll have to set a few more settings in this menu as opposed to Bazite, which had everything auto-filled except the drive to install. But let's start with installation destination. Clicking on this menu, the only drive I have in this PC has already been pre-selected. You can see that by the tick mark. So I'm going to hit done, but now I'll get the option to reclaim space. Because I had another operating system installed on this entirely and didn't purposely create a partition to try and install a second operating system, Fedora needs to reclaim some of that space. And as I said before, I plan on wiping this drive and doing a fresh install for the most straightforward experience. But whether you want a partition or you want a clean slate, you will likely need to reclaim space if something else was on this drive. So I'll turn your attention to the delete all button in the bottom right of this new window. I hope I don't need to explain what the delete all button means, but if you've backed up your data already or you're okay to lose everything on this drive, then you can click delete all and be on your merry way. So now we'll click reclaim space and we're back to the main menu with two other sections that require our attention. For the root account, you can leave this disabled if you're not sure if you'll need it. That's probably the safest option. However, if you do think you'll need to remote into your PC at some point, you can enable the root account or you can enable it later. I'm enabling it to see if there's any difference on the surface level. Now we'll click done in the top left, just as we did in the installation destination menu, and it's time to set a user. Here's the part where you do not need to sign into an online account to use the hardware that you bought and paid for. Fascinating, isn't it, Microsoft? So once you've put in the details for your local account, which doesn't need internet, you can click Begin Installation. I clocked this in at 7 minutes and 20 seconds. That's half the time of Bazite, but also about a quarter of the time of my last Windows installation. And I also checked my home network to see if it required any internet whatsoever to complete the install process. Besides a few packets here and there, it was in the vicinity of bytes, so it didn't need anything crucial to install. And the ISO file is actually quite small considering the other distros we've looked at. Come on, Ubuntu. One thing that might get a beginner, I didn't read the go ahead and reboot your system to start using it message, because normally at this point we get a big restart button in the middle of the screen. That's a pretty small quality of life thing though, and I'm sure it could easily be fixed later on. But let's continue on with our manual restart after we've installed. The first time you boot up Fedora might take a minute or two, as is often the case with any fresh install of any operating system. But one login screen later, and we're on the desktop with our one and only pop-up from Fedora. This is the exact same pop-up we saw in the live USB version, and we can hit the skip button in the bottom left. Now for those of you who aren't using 1080p screens, right click on the desktop and you'll see display configuration. There you have the options for not only 100% scaling and 200% scaling, but also 125, 150 and 175, and even more options. So that's great for people using 1440p monitors or other odd resolutions from other monitors. Next is dark mode. It's not under color management, but rather colors and themes. But while we're in colors and themes, let's sort out another feature that's missing from Windows out of the box. Auto login. Down at the bottom, click on login screen, SDDM. Now head to the top right of the window and click on behavior. Click the box next to automatically log in, and you can leave the other settings if you only have one user. Now you get a warning for KDE Wallet. As I'm showing you auto login specifically for gaming related setups, the idea being that we're going to use a controller for everything if we can, I don't think people using KDE Wallet will be interested in automatically logging in, as their password adds another layer of security. So once you click the apply button on the bottom left, then the next time you log into this system, it will automatically log in. And if you have Steam set up to open on startup and open in big picture mode by default, congratulations, you have yourself a Steam console. Now it's time for updates. See that little icon in the bottom right? Those are our update notifications, politely sitting in the bottom right, waiting for us to do something with them, as opposed to throwing them in the middle of the screen and demanding we do something with them right now, stopping whatever else we're doing, whether it be important or not. Clicking on that reveals our updates. Being that this is a fresh install, there's 5 gigabytes worth of updates here. And all I need to do is click update all and wait. And here's another great quality of life feature. We don't only get the option to restart an update, but if you were doing something extremely important and just needed to restart your system to give it a shake up because your program is stuck, you could also click restart and get straight back into your work. And you get the choice because it's your PC, not Microsoft's. And oddly enough that I should mention Microsoft, the update screen actually reminds me a lot of the install screen from Microsoft. It's probably the font. Something that really doesn't remind me of Microsoft is the fact that as we log back in, we don't get a use Microsoft's recommended browser settings window. You know, I still think that Microsoft updates are actually full page ads pretending to be updates. We do get one new pop-up though, but this isn't necessarily from Fedora. This is from KDE, the guys who made this desktop environment. And they'd like to show you the new features that they've put into this desktop environment. If you're interested, feel free to go ahead. However, if you're not, there's a toggle in the bottom left which you can click, and now you'll never see this pop up again no matter how many new features they add. Once again, giving you the choice of how you want to use your PC. How many Microsoft roasts am I allowed per minute? Next up, it's time to install Steam. The software manager, called Discovery, is already attached to our taskbar, so all we have to do is click on that icon and it'll pop up. And no, this isn't deja vu. This is the exact same place we saw our updates appear before. I really like having my system updates and my app updates in the one place. It makes it very easy, and all I have to do is click the one update all button and my system is ready to go. But there is one very crucial thing missing here. If we search for Steam, nothing comes up. That's because Steam isn't enabled in the store yet. So to do that, we need to go over to Settings, which is under Updates, and then scroll down to RPM Fusion for Fedora 42-non-free-Steam and enable it. This is essentially adding Steam to the Discover app so that we can download and manage it from here. It's not an ideal scenario. From what I understand, this has something to do with some sort of licensing issue. However, Bazite had Steam installed out of the box. And I know of other distros, some of them I've even shown on this channel, which do have Steam ready to go in their stores without needing to enable another repository. Repositories being places where you get apps from. And the reason I'm making a point of this is because this would probably put off a beginner. They wouldn't know to go and enable that repository, so they might think that you can't get Steam on Fedora and they might go back to Windows instead of trying another distro or just doing a quick Google search. But let's continue. I'll punch in my password and then I'll need to close the Discover app and reopen it to get Steam appearing there. So now when I search for Steam, it appears and I can click install. Once it's done installing though, we do have another small hiccup. Now I'm going to close the Discover store because there is no launch button here, which is fine. And I'm going to go over to the Not a Start menu and look for Steam, but it doesn't appear to be here. Normally it would be under Games or at the very least under All Applications, but it's not here. If I search in the Not a Start menu though, it will appear. So I can click on that and get Steam started, and that's fine. I found this very odd. So I went back to the Discover store and installed another program, VLC, to see if it had the same behavior, but it didn't. In fact, VLC not only had a launch button from the store, but it also appeared in the Not a Start menu and even made Steam appear. So my theory is that whatever process happens to install Steam doesn't have the little line of code that says update all the installed apps in the Not a Start menu thing. But VLC did have that special line of code, so that managed to update the apps and now I can see Steam. Again, I'm only nitpicking because I know that some beginners might get caught up on this if they're installing Fedora for the first time and they haven't seen this video or done a quick Google search. But let's move on to Steam itself. Logging in and installing a game is exactly the same as Windows. So let's move on to the difference. Over on the downloads page, you can see Proton. Proton automatically downloaded when I clicked install on a game. Proton is the magic sauce that is allowing gamers to leave Windows and go to Steam, so long as the developers aren't slapping down Steam Deck support because they can't install their anti-cheat spyware at a kernel level. Today's benchmark is Cyberpunk 2077. My poor little 2700X and RX 580 are going to struggle probably a little bit to get up and running. So when we get into the game, I'm just going to use whatever default settings Cyberpunk has picked. But I can say that my 2700X and RX 580 won't have to worry about the overhead of Windows stealing my data to train their AI to steal more of my data. Another thing I'll point out, if you click play and it doesn't work the first time and it's stuck on downloaded content, just hit stop and hit play again. This is a problem that I have sometimes for some games. I've had it on Windows, I've had it on Linux. It's not a Linux problem. So that was Fedora. Most of this process was really smooth to get up and running. The only hiccup we had was needing to manually enable a Steam repository and then having to close the Discover app, not see Steam appear in the start menu, manually search for it, and those little tiny bits and pieces which I only highlight because I would hope that they can be ironed out so that in future beginners can just get up and running and leave Windows entirely. Another thing I'll highlight, anyone who's seen my Manjaro video might think that there's a lot of similarities between Manjaro and Fedora. And you'd be right, because they are using almost identical desktop environments. So my position at this point would be that for a beginner, the most important thing, so long as the foundation is stable, is the desktop environment. How important a foundation is, I could probably make an entire video on by itself, specifically for beginners. but picking the right desktop environment seems to be the magic sauce to getting people off of Windows entirely. Because then if their foundation crumbles for whatever reason, because there are so many Linux distributions and something could go wrong in one of them, then all they need to do is switch distributions with the same desktop environment and they'll feel right at home again. So to get to the heart of the matter, do I think that Fedora could replace Windows? Yes, absolutely. Especially as a foundation, it has a lot going for it out of the box for beginners, as compared to vanilla Arch and vanilla Debian. So besides needing to manually enable Steam, I think Fedora is very easy and straightforward to use.